Our, excuse me. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. This is our fourth episode of History's Three Sides, and today we're going to talk about why we call ourselves History's Three Sides. But before we actually go into that, I have a little question for Ben.
Absolutely.
You see what that is, Ben?
Looks like a quarter to me.
That is a quarter. So what I want you to do is I'm going to flip this quarter. I need you to call heads or tails, sir.
Tails.
And you got heads.
Uh,
Heads. All right. So
I never
with
won.
a quarter, knowing that I flipped that, and I gave you options to call heads or tails, how many sides do you think that quarter's got, don't knowing those two options?
Well, the obvious answer would be two.
Two,
But
right. However, as historians, we know that there are
three because we have an edge.
three because you got the edge. Okay, and that's a big part of history. You got he said on this side, she said on this side, and really what happened is something in the middle.
Right.
I mean, classic example. Look at, you know, and this is dumbing it down a whole lot. Look at the Civil War, the South. Southern soldiers were fighting because somebody was on their land. They were being invaded. Northern soldiers were fighting to protect the Union and preserve the Union. What was really going on? It was really neither. It was fighting for or against slavery. Because if you look at the wording in the Confederate Constitution, they were fighting for states' rights. States' rights to do what? Hold slaves.
Well, slavery was amongst the issues. I still think it's a little deeper than that, but but yes, slavery was definitely one of the primary causes. But you have to look at the South too. Is the majority of the South didn't own slaves. The majority of the South was very poor. Owning slaves was a very much a wealthy person's uh, undertaking. Even a few slaves, even one or two is a lot. The best plantations were by far a rarity. A lot of the people who fought in the Civil War on the South and the North both fought simply because they thought they were defending what was rightfully theirs.
Right.
Uh, I don't think there was a whole lot of. I don't think the majority of the people, even in the North at that time, as we well know, prejudice was very strong on both sides. Even Abraham Lincoln himself, in his early years, had stated that the colored was not an equal. He did not believe he should hold office. And then later on in his career, as we well know, he reversed that significantly, issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which, again, you'll have people argue, was that out of altruism or was it a political move to keep uh, Great Britain from entering on the side of the South? So, again, right there, you have three different perspectives on one minor, or not minor, but one point.
Right. And like I said, when I mentioned it, it was dumbing it down a whole lot. It was just like a minor point considering what the major issues of the war were. But I'm glad you
Right.
brought up Abraham
Ultimately,
Lincoln. Well,
rich and powerful wanted to maintain their hold on slavery because they knew they could not maintain the economy of the South without it. Sadly, right or wrong, the South was built on the South's economic structure was held together largely by slave labor.
right. And I'm glad you brought up Abraham Lincoln because that kind of plays into the three sides as well. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation, freed the slaves, all that sort of stuff. Great guy, right? But then you got to take into consideration the other side that Abraham Lincoln specifically said he would be for sending them back to Africa or having them keep their own country as
Not only
long as
that,
it wasn't part of the United States.
not only that, why did he wait till 1863, 2 years into the war, before he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, if indeed that was something he truly felt was at the core of maintaining the Union?
Right. So if you look at that aspect of it, he's not really such a good guy. I mean,
Now, he had his major flaws, but
he did.
we're also looking at history from a different perspective and a more enlightened perspective. It's hard not to judge evil and wrong as wrong. It's very difficult though to judge it accurately from an outside perspective of 150 years. what back then was considered completely and totally socially acceptable would never be acceptable in the slightest nowadays. So it's that perspective we also have to look at somewhat objectively, although it is hard not to be subjective when looking upon history.
Oh, you're absolutely right, and that's a big thing about the three sides we talk about, and why we're called history's three sides, because we look at, as historians, we look at what this side said, what this side said, or what this side was about, what this side was about, and somewhere in the middle is what really happened or what it was about. And you could take that and apply it to really anybody. Look at, we did that with the good with Abraham Lincoln. Great, he freed the slaves, but his thoughts were this. So somewhere in the middle is the real man. But you look at the same thing with, excuse me, Adolf Hitler. Terrible guy. Over 6 million Jews were victims of genocide because of Hitler's thoughts and beliefs. So, terrible guy. But on the other extreme, if you were a German citizen, you weren't Jewish German citizen, he loved his country. And he was going to do everything to make that country successful. Great. But somewhere in the middle is what the true man was. And if you look at what really happened in history, he was more of the bad guy than a good guy.
Right. And part of that, and this is not by any means, please don't take this as justification for what he did. Part of that was he was our enemy. Because when we look at our ally, Joseph Stalin, he was guilty of just as many crimes, and upwards of 20 million people,
his own
Christians
people
and whatnot, that has been documented. But he doesn't get demonized because he was our guy.
Right.
Now, if you're on the perspective of the Ukraine or Belarusia at the time, who were having their lands raped and pillaged, the bitter harvest where they took all the food. When you look at all the damage that they did on that side, if we had been fighting against Stalin, he would not have been a good guy during this World War II.
Right.
Had we been fighting with Mussolini, he might not have been seen as a bad guy, even though he's a fascist. So there's that third strike there too, is where perspective depends on who your guy is too.
Right.
Stalin had the benefit of being on the our side because Hitler decided to get, I guess he never played a risk. You never try to attack into Russia and try to take the whole continent. And so there's that third side of perspective there too. Stalin, good guy to the world on a whole, but if you were under Soviet rule at any point in time, even though you were fighting against fascism, you were still facing a horrible, horrible enemy.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think about, especially with politics today. You got three sides of that as well. If you look at extreme far right, you're looking at fascism. Extreme far left, you're looking at communism. And on both ends of the spectrum, you got horrible atrocities that take place for the ones that are trying to maintain control. And then somewhere in the middle is the right way to do things.
Almost touches.
Yeah. So, and that's a big part, again, of the three sides of history. Most people, when they see the coin, you ask them how many sides, they're going to say two sides because they're so used to hearing heads and tails. But as historians, we can't look at one side or the other. We have to look at both sides and take what we see from both sides, and somewhere in that middle ground is what is really going on and is what really happened. So that's a big reason why we went with the name History's Three Sides, because we want to look at all three sides. And we might even have episodes where one episode we look at, and we go back to that example, we look at Hitler from this aspect of the German people and the good guy side of Adolf Hitler. Then on the next episode, we look at maybe the bad side of Adolf Hitler. We talk a little bit about the Holocaust and the genocide of not just Jews, but people that had disabilities, people that were different, that were not, they considered normal Germans. Homosexuals, correct. So, and then somewhere, maybe the third episode, we might have somewhere in the middle, some of the talking about the good and the bad, and then kind of weighing in the middle, trying to figure out, was he really a bad guy? Was he a really good guy? Obviously, most people are thinking of him as really as a bad guy, which he generally was. You could do the same thing with, and a lot of people don't think about this, Benedict Arnold. Oh, he's this traitor. He's this terrible guy. But look at what he did before if it wasn't for Benedict Arnold, even after he became a traitor, we would not have won the American Revolution.
People don't realize Congress screwed him royally.
Oh, big time.
They owed him tons of money. He was a daring general. He took many wounds for his country. He had a limp to his dying day from being thrown from his horse in combat. The man had dedicated everything he had under the promises that he would be paid back because he spent his entire family fortune to help raise the colonial army. And then Congress basically just told him to shut up and go away.
Yeah. Yep.
Cost of his marriage initially, cost of his family fortune, his home. He lost everything he had, and all he asked was a little recompense. And then when he finally tried to get some recompense, he was accused of being a looter and stealing, and he was bastardized and then not given his command back. So when the British came to him with another offer, he was kind of hard to stay loyal to people who aren't loyal to you.
Right, exactly. And and that's a big part of everything. One of my professors that I had in college, she made a comment that I was going to be a great historian one of these days, especially as a teacher, because about the Benedict Arnold. I took a writing class, and it was research and writing in history, American Revolution. And we had 2 papers we had to write, and it was a higher level class, so we had to write 2 10-page papers for the class, one for the first half, one for the second half. And in both cases, I kind of took a controversial view, and people look at Benedict Arnold as the bad guy. My paper was a 10-page paper on how Benedict Arnold wasn't a bad guy. He was a good guy. And I'd used everything that had happened all the way up until the point where he took that payment and became a turncoat. I did the same thing with, a lot of people don't know who Bannister Tarleton is from the American Revolution. But if they've ever seen the movie Patriot with Mel Gibson, the bad guy, played by Jason Isaacs,
Tarleton,
that colonel, the cavalry colonel, is based on Bannister Tarleton.
Yeah.
And I even made the explanation that Bannister Tarleton wasn't a bad guy, if you look at it from the British perspective.
Well, no, the British affected who Mel Gibson played. Mel Gibson played the Swamp Fox, who in reality, that character that he portrayed was notorious for hunting down Native Americans for sport and killing them. He was a blatant xenophobe. He would hunt, like I said, he would hunt men for sport, kill them, scalp them, and he kept the scalps. He was not this altruistic, wonderful character, family man who just, again, they twisted to make a good movie out of it, which I enjoy the movie. It's got some great historical reenactment within it that is phenomenal. It's well acted, but again, there's parts of that history that are completely not represented because, the British, the red coats are the bad guys and the blue coats are the good guys. And that's just how it is. And there again, you only have 2 sides of that story. You're not seeing the underlying aspect of it. The Americans were traitors. They were looked at no more fondly than the South was by the North during the Civil War. Americans were traitors to the crown. They were ungrateful. And in fact, the majority of Americans were fine with either staying with the crown or just not caring. They just didn't want a war. Only a very small part of agitators caused that entire war. So yeah, it's you get the benefit of being on the winning side, but the winning side doesn't always make the right side. Oh. That's all I want. That's my point to that. I'm not saying, I don't love being a free American, but I'm just saying that there's to the victory goes the spoils, and that goes with the writing history as well.
That's very true. And a lot of people, like you said, we're proud to be an American, but there's a lot of times when things that we've done aren't necessarily. Look at all the problems that are happening in Central America. That's because of interference by the United States, banana republics, and the drug trafficking that came out of a lot of those Central American countries, and our attempts to control drugs that are coming out of there and fight the drug wars and all that. A big part of the problems that are coming out of those Central American countries are because of interference by the United States.
Same with the Middle East. Most of the problems we've been fighting in the Middle East for the past 20 years were problems we caused in the 70s and 80s with Iraq and Afghanistan ourselves. We created Osama bin Laden. We
Yeah, we did.
created. We put the Shah in power in Iraq. We undid Iraq and Afghanistan. Were very, very, very forward thinking, forward looking, prosperous, and open societies prior to our intervention, which set them back to, in some cases, the Stone Age nearly. In another case, it helped Sharia law become a real thing. It helped extremists control the countries and completely undo centuries of progress.
A lot of that goes back way back to even the end of World War One. But we're not going to have
True.
time to go into that. Maybe that's another episode.
I'm just saying for more recent
Right.
example though, because the most that took place early in the late 70s, early 80s, where we've made true interventions that we probably should have thought through.
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we got about 4 minutes left. What I would like to do is just make sure that when you're studying history, don't just take one side story for it. For example, if you want to read history about the Native American wars in America, don't just read about the books that you see on bookshelves that are written by typically your white authors. There's a great book that I read in the past due to my Native American past. I had the interest in it. It was called Through Native American Eyes. A very good book that tells you a lot of the things that happened during the Native American wars between white Americans and the Native Americans that were fighting for their lands. So it gives you a different perspective on what was really going on. So you get to see kind of their side of what was happening. So then that way, then you can form your own opinion on, okay, what was really going on and who was really right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting close to the end here. So what I would like to do is, I advertised on our Facebook page that we're looking for a logo for our Facebook page. We can't necessarily pay for it right now, but one of the things we're looking for is somebody to maybe create that logo. And then when we actually do have merchandise, anytime something comes out, something new comes out, whether it's a shirt or a hat, guaranteed you got it, no cost. And it's advertisement. We would always make sure that we knew who, everybody knew who was the one that created our logo for us. But and I would like to also like to give a shout out to Geeking Poetic. It's another a blog. It's basically a few nerds and geeks get together and talk about different things. Sometimes it's superheroes. Sometimes it's B-movie genre, scary movies with Godzilla, and some of the other things that are out there that geeks like to look at. So check out Geeking Poetic also on YouTube. They're supporting us, and we want to make sure we support them. Any final words there, Ben?
All I want to say is, again, on the three sides issue, unless you are fortunate enough to have a teacher like Darren, and not to brag about myself, but a teacher like myself who spent the majority of their time learning history, not in school, but by researching outside research and outside influences. Unless you're fortunate to have a professor or teacher who is self-educated on history as well as institutionalized teaching of history, you are going to miss a lot, and there's going to be a lot lacking. So if you really truly want to know history, you're going to have to learn more of it on your own than you did in the classroom. And I'll tell you that from experience. I'm sure Darren will confer that the majority of what we know about history isn't what we learned in the classroom. We did enjoy our classroom studies. It's where we got our foundation, where we got, not saying you won't get a lot, but we never went over Vietnam in high school. It was a one-day thing we glanced over. French and Indian War, we never talked about. Very briefly, a one-day discussion. Now, when you're in school for 180 days, there's a lot of missing time there. So, it's just my personal thanks to people like Darren and people who I had that encouraged me to look outside the box as a historian and understand that what I learned in school is not enough to understand history. Look for those people, though. Seek them out, find them. They're passionate. Even if you don't like history necessarily, I'm sure that they'll make you, sorry about the whistler, I'm sure they can help you find that little spark anyway to maybe make you more interested, because history is a lot more than what's in a book. One book is certainly much more than what's in a textbook, and it's certainly much more than is allowed to be taught. I do say allowed to be taught in many cases in the classroom. So keep that in mind when you think of History's Three Sides, because chances are by the time you graduate high school, you pretty much only have had one perspective, and there's a lot more out there to find.
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to end there today. But before we go, I want to make sure that you check out our Facebook page, History's Three Sides. Check out the video on YouTube, History's Three Sides on our YouTube channel. And next week, we're going to start the first of a two-part series about separation of church and state, as requested by one of our subscribers. So we'll be talking a little bit about how our Constitution maintains or attempts to maintain separation of church and state, and why that ended up in our Constitution. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Ben, everybody, you have a great week. Thank you.
I know.